Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Jim Foerster, Forbes contributor and Chief Meteorologist for DTN. Jim, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Brittany. Glad to be here.
As we sit here right now, there have been reports of at least 16 tornadoes ripping through 6 states last night, and tornado warnings have continued into today. So, what do we need to know about the moment right now?
Right now, as you mentioned, the storms or yesterday's storms have kind of weakened and moved into the Ohio Valley, but they're regenerating themselves again. Unfortunately, a little bit different area today, but a very populated area up into the Ohio Valley, including some areas around Chicago where there's some very strong storms now already beginning to pop up. So, and then again tomorrow, more in the Ohio Valley. So this is a very slow moving system that kind of builds itself up as the day goes on, does its damage in the evening hours and overnight, and then takes most of the next day to kind of recharge. And that's what's happening again right now. So people need to heed the warnings. These aren't surprises. They've been very well forecasted, and sometimes there's only so much you can do. If you saw some of the footage from overnight in Oklahoma, the foundations were just stripped right down, unfortunately, in some of those tornadoes. But just stay aware and do what you can to make sure you have a safety plan, because you never know when you may need it.
This comes a week after a slew of deadly tornadoes ripped through Oklahoma, killing at least 5. So is this type of activity surprising or precedented for this point in tornado season?
It's not really surprising by any means. Sometimes, the difference between an F3 tornado or an F4, which is just wind damage, it's very subtle, but it can make a huge difference depending on how it hits, where it hits, what time of day it hits. Tornadoes after dark are particularly challenging, which is what happened last night, because you can't see them as well. And you don't see it like from 30, 40 miles away, this picture that you see sometimes. But it's raining maybe, and nobody sees it coming. And you hear that a lot. I never saw it coming, or it sounded like a freight train. Those are a lot of times the tornadoes that are at night or wrapped in rain, and they're very difficult to see. And that's unfortunately what happened last night. Not unprecedented at all. The peak tornado month is May, and we are in May. The second one is April. It was very active in April, and that's the second active month. So it isn't unprecedented. It's just we haven't maybe had it in a couple of years, so it seems like a lot. But unfortunately, we get about half of our yearly tornadoes in April, May, and June. So this is the time of the year in the U.S. where we do have half of our tornadoes in 3 months. That's a lot.
Hearing people say that they never saw that tornado coming is really scary. So, can you talk about the ingredients that tornadoes need to develop?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. They really need a couple of important things, which is why they're primarily focused in a certain part of the United States. Like, you don't hear of tornadoes hardly ever in Arizona or Washington State. You hear about them a lot in what we call Tornado Alley, from like Nebraska, Iowa, down through Texas. And what happens there is you get these ingredients that happen a lot. You get moisture at low levels. That's critically important. And that comes off of the Gulf of Mexico. That's a big body of very warm water. And tornadoes like that, or severe storms like that, moist, warm, low levels. Then you got to have dry upper levels. And you get that a lot of times by air going across mountains. It makes the air dry. So now you have a lot of moisture down here, a lot of dry air up here. Now that happens a lot, but if you can get that air at the ground to rise and want to go up in the air, I call it instability. You'll hear the air is very unstable. That means that the air down here really wants to rise up. Cold fronts make it rise. So something to make the air rise. And then the last thing is why we get these a lot in the middle part of the United States. It has to rotate as it goes up, and the jet streams provide that. So you have moisture, you have air that wants to rise or instability, and then you have that it starts to rotate aloft because of the jet stream, and that doesn't happen in like Massachusetts or Nevada. It doesn't mean you can't get a tornado there, but it doesn't happen the way it does. They have over 100 tornadoes a year in Texas on average. So those ingredients come together a lot in that tornado alley area, that moisture, the dry air, the instability, and those jet streams really, they get it going. They turn a small thunderstorm into a big rotating, and they call them supercells. They rotate.
You're saying that these ingredients are seen in Tornado Alley. In a recent piece for Forbes, you wrote that we should actually redefine what Tornado Alley is. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, maybe not redefine, but rethink our confines. Those why tornadoes happen. I told you, even at other places. There was a terrible tornado in China a couple days ago. So other parts get tornadoes. The middle part of the United States, what we call Tornado Alley traditionally, gets the most anywhere. In the last, I don't want to say few years, more like 20 years, we have seen those same ingredients coming together in other areas, particularly the southeast United States, like the northern part of Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, that area, not in the traditional tornado alley, but speaking of El Nino weather patterns for several years in a row, that kind of favored those ingredients to be down there. Now the weather patterns have changed, and those ingredients are kind of back where they normally are. And but that doesn't mean at all that there can't be a tornado in Tennessee. So I think that if you drew Tornado Alley today, it maybe is a little bit bigger than it was 20 years ago or 50 years ago. But those states like Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, they get so many more tornadoes than the other parts. It would take a lot to knock them off the throne, if you will, because it's just very favorable to get those ingredients all together at once.
As you said, May is the most active month for tornadoes.
Yeah.
What can people expect for the rest of tornado season?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, the next couple days look quite active, unfortunately, where there's a lot more people live in Indiana and Illinois and Ohio than, with all due respect to the horrible damage, the density of population is so much greater as you head into the Ohio Valley. So we could have weaker tornadoes, if you will, that cause more impact because there's just more people there, less rural, more developed. So we gotta really keep our eye out. The people there aren't as accustomed to tornadoes as they are in Oklahoma or Kansas. There's lots of differing social factors when you get into that part of the country that they just don't get that many tornadoes, and they don't. So the awareness isn't quite that high, really, all through society. In the schools, maybe in the media. They shut things down yesterday in Oklahoma proactively, like closed schools. I don't know if they do that in Chicago for severe weather, for example. So there's some things like that are different. But after this week, after those next couple of days, it does look like there'll be a relative break in the horrible severe weather we've had through the central part of the United States, at least for 2 weeks, towards the end of the month. And then we naturally start to see that area shift a little bit further northward as the summer goes on, because it just gets too hot down in the far south. Tornadoes don't like real hot air. So it tends to shift northward, more into the Dakotas, maybe Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and it definitely gets less. This is the peak time of year, but tornadoes don't happen that much in July and August versus April, May, and June. It really does drop off when everybody just gets hot. You lose that jet stream thing, and you have thunderstorms. It rains a lot in the summer, but you don't get as many tornadoes.
And what's your advice to those who might not be as accustomed to tornadoes, who might be facing one in the upcoming few days?
Don't take them lightly. Don't chase them. There's a lot of trees where they're going to be today. There was not a lot of trees where they were yesterday or where they usually are. So you're not going to see these tornadoes from 40 miles away, like this majestic little cloud on the horizon. It's hard to see with all the trees in that part of the country. So listen to the sirens, listen to the official guidance from your National Weather Service office, which is often conveyed in the media. It's the same thing. The best place to get that information is the media, but it's important. There's really one voice for safety when it comes to events like this, and that is the National Weather Service. And they're the ones that are, right now I'm sure they've been ready for this event, and they're staffed for it, and they're ready to get those warnings out as soon as they can to protect people. And when you get a warning, take cover. Don't go on your back porch and take a picture of it for social media. It's probably the worst advice that you could get, because they just don't happen that often, but that doesn't mean they're not really bad things.
Jim Foerster, I really appreciate your expertise today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great. It was good to be here. Thank you.